in this video, I'm going to show you how to put your Prioritron kit together. So you can see I've got the main circuit board here, and I'm going to start off by putting the resistors in place. So all I'm going to do is thread them through from this side here, from the side that's got their value written on them. Thread them through, push them all the way through there, and then just hold them in place. I'm bending the wires over at the back, so I'll come back in a sec when I've put all of the resistors in place, and we'll start soldering. So I've got all of the resistors positioned where they need to go. At this point, if I just want to check I'll put the right resistors in the right place, then I'll just go around and check them with my multimeter. There we go, just to check that the values that it says on the board are the values that I've put on there. All of the components, we're going to put the component will sit the side of the board that has the value on. We're going to put some things on this side of the board. Okay, so I've got all of the legs through there, and I'm just going to solder them in place. The board's quite nicely spread out, so it's relatively easy and straightforward to do. I'm just, you see, heating up the leg, feeding in a bit of solder. You don't want to heat up too much. You don't want to leave it too cold either. There's a little knack to it, but you pick it up quick enough. There we go. I think that is all autumn, this one there. There we go. Okay. So let's have a quick look at what those look like. You can see the little blob of solder completely covers the pad on the back. Now, with a decent pair of clippers, I'm just going to cut those off. Go through, cut all of them off. Okay. And next, we're going to position the capacitors. I'll show you that in a sec. Okay, so you can see I've snipped all of those off using my wire cutters, nice and flush to the board. If you're using a pair of pliers, you might not get those quite as short as I have. That doesn't really matter, so long as they're not touching anything else in there. So the capacitors, we've got several different types here. The capacitors are all on the board to remove unwanted noise. So down at the bottom here, we're going to put this big capacitor here. This one is the only polarized capacitor. So you'll see it's got some minus symbols there. So that side of the capacitor needs to go on this part of the board here, which is white. The negative lead is shorter as well, so the short leg goes through there. None of the others are polarized, just like the resist. So I'm going to bend those over. None of the others are polarized, so that doesn't matter. So this removes some of the noise that we get from the USB power supply. So if there's any buzz from the USB power supply, that's going to remove it. So this little 104 So 100 nanofarad does the same. We've got a couple of spots here for 104. So 100 nanofarads, it says 104 on it. So I'm going to put those up there to 104. Capacitors up at the top there. What these do is remove any noises that we get from the rotary encoder, the switch, the little rotary switch. And then here, this part of the circuit board, this turns the signal that we get out of the Arduino into the audio signal that we actually hear. So we've got to filter out some unwanted noise that we get off of the Arduino. This is the 220 nanofarad capacity. It looks a little bit different. It says 224 on it, if your eyes are good enough to see that. So those ones go in there. I'm just bending the legs so they don't fall out. And then this little tiny fella here, look at that. That is 102. That's the 1 nanofarad that goes up here just to take out some very high pitched sounds that only children and animals can hear. There we go. Okay. There's one more 100 nanofarad capacitor that I need to put in there. So just as before, I'm going to solder those in place. And snip them off. There we go. So I've soldered all of those in place, just like the resistors. I'm going to snip off all those legs. I didn't show you earlier putting that fourth 100 nanofarad capacitor in there. That's where it goes there. So there are 4 of those. I forgot that. Okay, so now we've got all of those components in place on this side of the board. We're going to put the sockets and the various switches and variable resistors on. To make sure that all of that's lined up properly, you'll need the front panel. So get that out and get all of the sockets ready. Okay, so for this next part, we're going to populate this side of the board. We've got this is a rotary encoder. So when you turn that around, you can feel it's kind of clicks. These are the variable resistors, those that move more smoothly. We've got these little 3.5mm jacks, 3 of those. We've got this switch or little button. So we're going to put those in place, and we want to make sure that everything stays lined up when we solder it together. So we're going to put them in, then put the front panel on, just hold it on with tape so that it doesn't wobble around. But before we do that, we might just want to highlight where the writing is on this front panel. It's quite a satisfying part of the whole project. If I go over that with some kind of some kind of marker pen. Just wipe it off. It just picks out the text really nicely. So I'm just using a permanent marker. You've got a Sharpie, that works well. Those kind of Posca pens work nicely as well. Yeah, pretty much anything will do it. There we go. Okay. Right, lovely. So I can see the write on there much more clearly. I'd suggest you start off with the rotary encoder, because if we solder the wrong thing in there, then that's a real pain to get it out. The rotary encoder's got five little pins. The variable resistors, they've got 3 pins, and then these little tabs on the side that hold it in place. So they get bent in the aeroplane on the way from China. So just make sure they're lined up so they go in the holes. Okay. It's quite fiddly, but just make sure that they are actually in those holes. Okay, so you can see 3 pins that side, 2 pins that side. Down here we've got all 3 of those pins. They're pushed in nicely. Put a switch in. This one really likes to fall out once you've got it in. Again, you might just need to straighten the pins on that out with maybe a pair of pliers or your fingers if they're a little bit bent. And then put these sockets in here. The sockets all got 3 pins on. They go in like that. Okay. So now I'm going to put the panel on the front, get it all lined up, and then I'm just going to hold that in place with a little bit of tape while I solder it. And that way, when it's soldered together, everything's going to line up. Okay, so on the back, same as before, I'm just going to feed in a little bit of solder. These ones are fiddlier because they're closer together. Oh, tape's falling off. There you go. Check it's all lined up. So yeah, it's still lined up. Yeah, so the pins are a little bit closer together, and you just want to make sure that you're not making any bridges between the solder pads. If you do, you're just going to have to heat it up and wipe them away with the end of your soldering iron. Okay, good way to do this actually. If I'm working my way from the bottom here, this way, you see my soldering iron is sitting against the pin, the top side of the pin, and that means that I'm not heating up the pin that I've already soldered. So if I was going in that direction, then my soldering iron might remelt the pin that I've already done. So here we go. I'm just soldering the sockets in now. That's the socket. Right. If I'm happy with that, yeah, they all seem to be lined up nicely. Now I'm going to put a jolly good blob of solder on these these tabs that hold everything in place. If you wanted to, you could bend them down so they grip onto the board, but I'm going to treat my Prioritron gently. So just a big blob of solder will be fine. There we go. There we go. Okay, so those 6 big pads there, that provides a kind of mechanical support for the switches and the variable resistors. Right, so I can take the front panel off now. We'll deal with the fiddly bit. Okay. So for this next bit, we're going to need our LED panel, and we're going to need these three wires. These are really nice silicon covered wires. So actually, you can just strip the ends of them with your fingernails, and what I'm going to do is just twist that round and hold all of those wires together. Even better if I pull it off with my fingernails, and then before I've taken it right off, I'd start twisting. It gives me a really neat end. Okay, the important thing is that the ends of that wire are not all sticking out like that, but they're nice and tightly twisted together so that they're going to go through the holes, and they're not going to make any naughty connections. So what I need to do now is what you call tin the ends of these wires. So I'm just going to use a little bit of solder, get a blob of it on the end of my soldering iron and run it along the wire. I'll do the blue one so where you can actually see it. How about that? There we go. So get a blob on the soldering iron and then run the wire through that blob of solder. Okay. So there, I've tinned the ends of those, and these are now much too long. We only need on these about 5mm at most. So you can see I'm cutting it really short, but it's best to strip about 1 centimetre, tin it, and then cut it off, and then you'll get really neat little ends of those 3 wires. Let's have a look at the board. So on the back, we want the right and the correct size up, better than expected. So that writing is going to be the right way up. We've got these little pads over here. Ignore those. Those are to connect another board onto it if we wanted to. It's down here. It says V minus in and V plus. The first thing I'm going to do is just put a little bit of solder onto each of those pads. I don't want to overheat it, but it's got to be properly melted and neat like that. Okay, so there we go. The red wire is going to go on the V plus. I'm just going to heat that up again. And put my wire in there. The blue wire goes to the in, and V minus, that's going to be the black wire. There we go. Do it like that. Okay, so I've got my panel with the with the 3 wires in place, red, blue, black. Just make sure that there aren't any connections, bridges between them. Okay, and then I'm going to strip and tin the other ends of those wires. Same as before, I'm going to take off about 1 centimetre of the insulation, tin those. If you've got a little stand that will hold on to it while you do it, that's great. Otherwise you have to find a small child to hold it while you solder it on there, and try not to burn their fingers. Right, so that's ready, and we're going to solder that. We're going to solder that in place over here. So these wires are going to go through from this side, the side with all of the controls. This is quite fiddly. I'm going to do them one at a time. The alternative is that you can do them, you post them all through and then put a little bit of tape on the back like that to hold them in place. But post them through, I'll put a little bit of tape on it, because otherwise they'll fall out when you're not looking. There you go. Thank you. There we go. Now I'm going to trim those off. Okay. Okay. If your board came with the socket for the Arduino already soldered in place, then you can ignore this next bit. But if it came bare like this, then you're going to have to solder these in. If you haven't got a kit, then you're going to have to solder those in. The first thing is we've got to cut these strips of length. How I suggest you do that: put it on the Arduino and line the end up with the end that's got the USB socket on, because actually on the Prioritron doesn't use these terminals back here. So if the worst came to the worst, you cut this too short, it doesn't actually matter so long as you've got these ones in place. So then using my wire cutters, I'm going to cut this strip so you can see that pin there lines up with the last pin on the Arduino there, and I'm going to cut at the next one down here. I'm going to cut there, and that's the pin that's fallen out. So you can see there, that pin there is all encased in that strip. It's all the right length. But as I say, if it goes wrong, you cut it too close in there and that pin comes on, it doesn't actually matter. The bit we got left over, it's got a clean end and a scraggly end. I'm going to put the clean end, line it up with the USB, make sure that it is in the right place, and then cut it at the pin. I'm going to cut there in line with the pin that doesn't have a pin on the Arduino. You can see what I mean. That pin on the Arduino lines up with that pin there. That pin there, that one would be empty. Okay, so I've got a little bit left over. Who knows what I'll use that for? Okay, so then I'm going to put it in place like that. Now I would leave it attached to the Arduino, because the Arduino is going to keep everything at right angles, so that it's not going to wobble from side to side, and it's going to be difficult for me to get that in and out. So I'll put a bit of tape to hold it in place, and then I'm just going to have to solder all of those little tiny pins there. And actually, it's not as bad as it seems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work the same as before. If I solder that one and then I solder that one, you can see that my soldering iron is going to melt the one just above it, and that could cause problems. So I'm going to work my way systematically up like this. There you go. So the one I've just done, that's where I'm feeding the solder in from, so my soldering iron's not going to melt it. So I'm just going to put a little blob of solder onto each of those. Okay. Oh, that one didn't go. There we are. And then these ones up here. So I'm just going back. If the solder doesn't actually cover the pad, then I'm going back to it again. Okay. So I've done all of those. They've got a little bit of solder on each of them. Now, if you look on the internet at what solder is supposed to look like after you've applied it, you'll see that it shouldn't be a little blob like that. So actually what I'm going to do now, with a clean soldering iron, I'm just going to go back and reheat each of those. I'm just going to heat up till I see it melts, and then usually you see it run into the hole. I'm just going to reheat each of those. Reheat each of those up until I see the solder melt. You see the shape of it change. So it's a kind of conical shape rather than being a blobby shape. That way I know I've definitely got a good connection there. Okay. Now you can see over here I've joined those pads together. So that's going to be a disaster unless I sort that out. If I just get a clean soldering iron, if you've got a solder sucker, you can use that. But I'm just going to use the end of the soldering iron and wipe that away, just to make sure it's not making any connections that I don't want. Okay, there we go. So the secret to getting it off, if you put too much solder on and you need to remove it, just keep the end of your soldering iron clean. So you should have a sponge, little sponge, or a little bit of wire wool. I'm just going to use that to to clean the end of the soldering iron. Make sure that it's clean, and now just inspect each of those. Just make sure that there's no little solder bridges, or maybe there's something going on there. Look at that. There we go. Okay, so I've got my Arduino in place. And the board in place. So I reckon I'm pretty much ready to test that. So, if your board came with those little strips already fitted, that little socket for the Arduino already fitted, then all you need to do is plug in your Arduino. If not, you've got to solder it on, and I've just shown you how to do that. So before we go any further and stick everything down and do all of the nuts and bolts up, we should test it, and we can just power the Arduino and the LEDs off of the USB socket there. So if you can't really see that, but I'll turn some lights off. You can see. There we go. So you can see that it's working. I'm just going to check that the rotary encoder works. Yeah, that changes that. Our switch works. That scrolls through the codes, through the sequences. I can plug in some headphones. Okay, so all that seems to work fine. So my two variable resistors, they're controlling the filter. I can switch between sequences, and my rotary encoder works. Okay, great. So let's put it all together, and then we can start playing with it for real, making some music. So now when the front panel goes on here, the LEDs need to be pressed firmly against the underside, like that. But if they just sit on the board like that, you can see they're too low down because the variable resistors are going to hold the board there, the front panel there. So we need something underneath that just to press it up against the front panel. So in your kit you should have some little bits of foam. So you have 3 little bits of foam, so you need to get those now. Okay, so we're ready to put the whole thing together. We've got these little bits of foam, we've got some nuts for the variable resistor, we got these for the jack sockets, and then we got the USB socket. So I'm going to put the USB socket in there, and what I would be, if you've got a little bit of super glue, or you got a hot glue gun, then I would put a blob of that on the back of that socket. And sometimes they're a little bit loose, and when you pull the USB out, then the socket comes out as well. So at this point I would just, if you've got some super glue or a hot glue gun, I would just put a blob on there to hold it firmly in place. Now this is the worst bit of the whole project, because we've got to solder that onto there, and we've got everything else connected as well. So these wires need to go in from this side here, so they're going to feed through there. The black is the ground, the red is the 5 volts. The little bit of wire sticking out is really short, so it's easy for it to fall out. I'll put a bit of tape there. Hopefully it's going to hold it in place. And then everything else is all flapping about as well. There we go. Solder that in place there. Okay. Now, there we go. So that, let's just check that that's all okay. Okay. So what I'm doing here is checking that those wires are pushed hard into the board, so that they're not going to touch together and short circuit. It might be that black one. I'm just going to heat that up again and push it a little bit further through, so that it doesn't touch together there. This is easier if you've got one of these kind of little things that can hold it, but I'm not using that in case you don't have one, just to show it's possible. Okay, so now what we need to do is take a little strip of foam, and we're going to use that to run those wires neatly along the back like that. Okay, just hold those in place. We're going to make sure that this is the right way up, better than expected. Yep, so we're not, it's really annoying to put the whole thing together and then you turn it on and you realise the screen's upside down. Then I'm going to put these foam panels on top of there. Now I cut these myself, so you might have to trim them so that they fit neatly in there. There we go. So now the screen's going to go on there. Remember, better than expected, like that. Now I'm going to get that lined up there, and then put the front panel in place, and then I'm just going to power it up again and just make sure that I'm happy with how it's all lined up. It's a little bit wobbly, so I'm just going to adjust it there. See, I'm moving it around. There we go. I'm happy with that, so I'll hold that in place and then put the nuts on there. I can unplug that now. I'm just going to do them up finger tight to begin with. Okay, so these little rings here that go on those jacks, it's really tempting to use a pair of pliers on them, do them up tight, and you can do that, but the metal is so thin and so soft that if you get and try and do them up too tight, then you strip the thread. So at most, I've done them up finger tight, and at most like just a little bit, not even a quarter turn. Any more than that's not really safe, because you'll easily be able to over tighten those. These ones are a bit more forgiving. If you've got a little spanner, a pair of pliers, you can do that nice and tight. So that's it really. That's it. Finished. Just got to put some, just put your knobs on it. So the way I put the knobs on is the two variable resistors. You want to get those so the line, so turn those all the way to the left, and then the line on your knob is kind of, what's that, about 7 o'clock. Yep. And then you can see it makes sense when they're all the way to the right. They're what, about 5 o'clock, all the way to the left. They're at 7 o'clock. The knob that you put on the rotary encoder, because that turns all the way around, it doesn't matter where the line is on that. The front panel is cut with these holes so that it fits inside a standard double Patris box, which you can get from B&Q. Just use the screws that you normally get to screw in a double socket, and they go through there, or you can put it in any other box that you've got. But there you go. That's your Prioritron. Congratulations. Any problems? My email address is on the bottom of the instructions, and it's in the description below, and it's on the instructions about how to use the Prioritron. I hope you have fun. Do get in touch if you have any problems, or if you record some music. I would love to hear it. I really would. Okay, thanks.